Hi, my name is Pete Weichlein, and I'm the CEO of FMC, the Former Members of Congress Association. And thank you so much for tuning into the video cast that is part of our Congress at a Crossroads series, which we produce in partnership with the Fulcrum. Our goal is to take an issue from the headlines and engage a Democrat and a Republican in a brief conversation, just to remind everyone what it looks like when differing opinions and points of views are handled with collegiality and respect, and also to demonstrate that there's much more common ground across the political aisle than most folks realize these days. So today, we'll take a closer look at the debt ceiling, and I'm joined by Bart Gordon, who is a Democrat from Tennessee and served in the House from 1985 to 2011, and whose committee assignments include the Budget Committee, Energy and Commerce, and the Banking and Finance Committee, among others. And David Camp, a Republican from Michigan, who served in the House from 1991 until 2015, chairing not only the Ways and Means Committee, but also the Joint Committee on Taxation. And David also served on the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction and on the Bowles-Simpson Commission, which in 2010 was established to find ways to achieve fiscal sustainability. Obviously, we could not have asked for more expertise on this panel, and I thank you both for joining. Yesterday, October 12th, for almost the 100th time since World War II, Congress approved legislation that temporarily raises the government's borrowing limit to $28.9 trillion, which is a debt limit increase of almost $500 billion. And we'll get to the repercussion of the word temporary in a second. But let me start with you, David, if I may. Why are we stuck with this political exercise for now almost the 100th time? This seems to be an arbitrary measure, in my opinion, that gives lots of folks the opportunity for grandstanding and great sound bites, but doesn't necessarily rein in the debt. And maybe I'm wrong here, but can't we do better is my first question to you, the easy one to start you off with.
Well, thanks, Pete. It's great to be with you, and also to be with my good friend, Bart Gordon. Look, I do think that this does serve some purpose. It does highlight the fact that we do have a deficit. We do have an unsustainable deficit and debt going forward. But you're right. In recent years, it's certainly become a very difficult issue to manage and really gets lost in is the government ever going to default on our debt or not? And when I dealt with this as chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and ranking member, I think there were 4 or 5 occasions. It was a split government. President Obama was in office. And so, Republicans had the majority in the House, but Democrats had the majority in the Senate and had the White House. So it's a different dynamic there. And at that point, it was really, how do you, get the consensus to do something difficult like this, which is to raise the debt ceiling? I do think there are some other options out there that can be considered. I think for Republicans, they view this as an opportunity more to focus that we do have a debt for some. And I think the parties view this a little bit differently in terms of whether it has any purpose at all. And there are some options, I think, going forward. But we often had to, come up with some reason to get people to vote for the debt limit, whether it was the Budget Control Act that created the super committee you mentioned, or whether it was prioritizing debt, which we had to do at one point, have a bill that also allowed the Treasury Department to prioritize debt, obviously accepting things like Social Security. So it's always a very difficult thing to do, even in sort of bipartisan way. But I do think at least Congress, I think, is going to want to have a role going forward on this, and there are reforms that could be done. But I think Congress will want a role in not just having the debt limit not exist. I think this issue is something that they're going to have to find another way of addressing the concerns that some members care about that are connected to this.
Well, David, I think you're correct in that it is an opportunity to discuss the deficit, to talk about maybe what we can do about it. But I think we're past that now. That type of civil discussion just doesn't happen. And this is too much of a time bomb to play politics with it. We are now the only country, it's my understanding, except for Denmark, in the Western countries that have this type of debt limit. And so if you could have a civil conversation, maybe fine, but it's strictly gotten to be a political exercise now. And so I think there are alternatives. One alternative would be to give the Treasury the ability to increase the debt limit. They'd have to come to Congress, and justify it. But I think it's time to make a change, and I think that would be one approach that would be a good way to go forward.
And let me ask you, before we again get to the word temporary, because there are implications for what the rest of the year is going to look like. As you're looking at what's happening on Capitol Hill right now with this debate, give us a sense where you were when you served on the Hill when this issue came up. David, you already mentioned this as part of your chairmanship and the dynamics that involve a Republican Capitol Hill and a Democratic White House. Everyone thinks, looking back, things were easier and better, and now it's so hyper partisan that even this kind of issue may push us over the brink. Is that your sense as well, or are we wearing, with hindsight, are we wearing rosy glasses and everything was so much more collegial just a couple of years ago? David?
It wasn't easy then, I could tell you. I do think that this extension is short term. So unfortunately, we're going to be back here again dealing with this in December or maybe January. It looks as if the amount they raised the debt limit was enough to take us over into January. But if in fact they do pass this infrastructure bill and have to transfer $100+ billion to the Highway Trust Fund, it could pull the debt limit back into this year. So I think we may be looking at late in the year, or maybe Christmas as a backstop to that. But it's always been difficult. I think some of the ideas out there, I think Speaker Pelosi gave some remarks the other day that she'd like to make it automatic. I mean, earlier we did have what we called the Gephardt rule, that if a budget passed, the debt limit already went up. We did move to where we suspended the debt as opposed to increasing it by a certain dollar amount. So there have been some changes over time in that. There is a proposal, I think it's Senator Bennett and Peter's Bennett bill that says, the president can raise a debt limit and Congress would have a veto over that with a 60 vote margin in the Senate and simple majority in the House. So you might be able to move to some other mechanism that still gives Congress a role, but maybe not in the same way, because it is, I think, not helpful to our credit rating, to our standing in the world, to have a question of whether the U.S. is going to default on its debts. So whether they can move forward on that in this particularly, difficult time, where they're trying to move a number of pieces of significant legislation, but they will have to deal with this again before the end of the year. And I think if I were in the majority, I would say Senator McConnell blinked once. He's probably going to blink again, and but I wouldn't count on that. So they're going to have to find a way, I think, with one party only to increase the debt limit later this year.
And Bart, if you could, sorry to interrupt, but also it'd be interesting to hear your point of view as we add President Biden's agenda, the Build Back Better agenda, to this, what I now think is almost a perfect storm of huge pieces of legislation and huge numbers that Congress now has to address over the next couple of weeks and months. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Well, let me just quickly go back to this idea about somebody blinking. When you're talking about bringing the whole world economy down, which is basically what would happen if we defaulted on our debt. Not to mention that Social Security wouldn't be paid, the military wouldn't be paid. I mean, it's just, those risks are just too high. And Congress has passed, multiple times in the past. A Democratic Congress passed a budget increase for President Trump's spending. And what this is, it's like a credit card. The money's already been spent. The question is, are you going to pay it? So, okay, why are things different? As David said, well, things are different now. Well, they're different, I think, fundamentally, and it goes to your question too. There is a 50-50 Senate with the vice president breaking the tie. depending on what day it is, there is Democrats have a majority of, 4 or 5 or 6 in the House. But as a practical matter, it takes 60 votes in the Senate. And so both parties are looking at the next election and how can they get advantage. And I hate to say this, it's not everybody, but there's enough that is looking at every issue, not what's best for the country, but what's best for the next election. And I guess their assumption is that if we get the majority, whichever party might be, then if we do some bad things along the way, that will justify it. But the stakes are just too high here. And so when you combine that with the infrastructure bill, with the other stimulus, with the fragile state of the economy, with the fragile of the U.S. sort of role in the world now, and the world, over the last few years is, I don't think they think we're the same leader that we used to be. This is very, very dangerous. And so how do we get out of this? Well, for one thing, nobody's ever made money betting against Nancy Pelosi, but this is her biggest challenge that she will be facing. I think another byproduct is this could be the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of the filibuster in the Senate. It may just be, Democrats may say, this is just too dangerous. Personally, I would like to see the filibuster, stay. I think it serves a purpose, if it's in the original purpose, to try to help negotiation. But now filibuster is used by both parties to not even allow a bill to come up to the floor. You can't even discuss it. So I think that's another dangerous piece of this. So we are, you tell your kids don't go out after midnight, nothing good happens. Nothing good's going to happen, in Congress now with the election. You might think it's a year away, but it's on everybody's mind right now.
And I would just say that the parliamentarian has really said that the Budget Reconciliation Act that Congress is considering now could be amended to raise the debt limit. So the parliamentarian in the Senate, which is one of the referees of what can happen in the Senate legislatively, has said that this could be done. So it is possible for the majority to raise the debt limit without lots of drama. But I agree. There's partisan politics on both sides, and Democrats want to force Republicans to vote for this. Republicans don't want to be a part of it. They both have arguments on each side on why they take that position. But the fact is, it can be done without a lot of drama, but it would mean that most likely that it would be raised by a dollar amount as opposed to suspended to a date certain. And this is what's made those in the majority nervous that would have to vote for it, is they'd be raising the debt by a certain dollar amount. But look, I do think that when I've dealt with this before, it was trying to find a path forward whichever way I could. And it was different on each time I worked on the debt limit issue. And they're going to have to find a way, and whether that is through budget reconciliation and doing it there, or whether that is finding some way maybe of making it part of a bill that's passing. That may be the way to do it, but it doesn't seem as if they're going to have much Republican support on this going forward. And look, the Republicans will say, look, there was $2 trillion in spending this year. You're saying it's already been spent. We didn't vote for any of that spending. Why should we vote for the debt limit? So, they have their position, but we both agree that the specter of default is not something that we want to get close to. It's sort of like you don't want to kick up the dust on the chalk line. You want to be well away from that. And in the past, Congress has gotten over that line and recently very dangerously close to that line, and it is not helpful. So what we have to really find a way is for, the leaders to really sort of work with members to try to chart a path forward. And like I said, it wasn't always easy. I found different ways to do it with, different mechanisms to try to get support and get the votes to get it done ultimately. And what really does complicate this is when you have such a close margin, I was in the Congress when Republicans had a 7-vote margin in the House, and it was very difficult to manage and very difficult to get anything done. And, you know, not only is it a close margin in the House, it's, you know, dead even in the Senate, except for the vice president. So it's going to be even harder to get some buy-in, because every member that really is the deciding vote on almost on anything that happens. And that makes it harder for people to do some of these tougher issues.
Well, the simple way to handle this would be, quite frankly, for Mitch McConnell to get out of the way. You know, just let him have a vote. But he is requiring through a filibuster that they can't just have a vote. I think Democrats would pass it with their 51 votes, but he's not allowing them to do that. He's saying, no, you know, we're going to filibuster it. So you have to have 60 votes or do it through a reconciliation.
Yeah, there are really two simple ways to do it. One is to not filibuster it, which the Senate Republicans could do, or two, Senate Democrats could use budget reconciliation, where they'd only need, you know, 51 votes. So there's really two simple ways this could get resolved.
Well, the second way is not that simple, in that it's going to, you have to rework the whole reconciliation bill. I think you have to go back and get new authority to do it.
You wouldn't. The parliamentarian just ruled you could amend it, so you wouldn't need new authority.
But you would still have to rewrite it and go through all that process. And I'm told that takes, you know, some period of time to do all that.
Well, they haven't written the bill yet, so it would be an amendment to a bill they're writing now. Yeah.
But both of you have confidence in cooler heads prevailing, that there are members and leadership who understand the politics of it, but also understand the dire consequences of it, and have enough experience of 3 years of legislating to get the job done. At least I'm hoping that's what I'm hearing, because that's the note I'd like to end on.
Well, I think leaders can only go as far as their members will let them. So I'm afraid that we're probably going to bump up very close to the next deadline again.
It's going to be very difficult, very difficult. I was at the grocery store yesterday with a Republican senator friend of mine, and we were lamenting, you know, where things are. And I have to say, you know, well, I won't even get into, it was handled poorly on both sides. It was handled poorly on both sides, and we can't afford to let that happen again.
No, we can't. I agree with that.
Well, I thank you both for your insight. I thank you both for your many years of public service. I know I'm not the only one who wishes both of you were still up on Capitol Hill and help us steer the ship through some troubled waters. But I now get to tap into you as former members, so that's almost as good. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And to the viewing audience out there, thank you for tuning in, and we'll reconnect with you in about a month. Again, picking an interesting topic from the headlines, and again, presenting a Democrat and a Republican who certainly know how to get along and get the job done. So thank you.